In Ernest Holmes' work that he has laid out for us, there's a theme that runs through it. And that is that Holmes was optimistic about the evolution of religion. And I say this today because I know that we can sit around with our laundry list of all the grievances we can think about when it comes to religion down through the years. We can think about the bad old days of religion, and maybe some people think that we're still in the bad old days. I don't know, but I know a lot of things have gone on within religion that has made its evolution, clumsy at times, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. There have been people who have been hurt. There have been wars waged under religion, all kinds of things. A lot of shame, a lot of guilt. But today I want to embrace Holmes' idea of the evolution of religion. I want us to imagine for a moment what it was to live in the 11th and 12th centuries. In terms of everyday life. Chances are, living at that time, and maybe some of us lived at that time, depending upon what your beliefs are. But chances are we worked in agriculture in some way, shape, or form. We were raising animals, we were raising crops, we were cutting wood. It was our hand that created everything, almost everything in our existence. The place we worked, the place we lived, the place we loved. We went through the summers, and we went through the winters, and we went through the springs, and we went through the falls. And there were not a lot of resources that we think of today. And so basically the everyday life, and that's where I want to kind of bring us into, is the everyday life could be a very dark, shadowy life, because even in the best of times, we were working, sun up to sundown, literally. There was not enough hours in the day to do everything that we had to do. When you think about dealing with the entire existence of an individual, a family, all of that. So sun up to sundown. We ate what we grew, and if the seasons weren't too good, then we didn't eat a whole lot. And if they were, then we ate better. And so we would get done with the day, we would eat, and we would go to bed. And we would get up and we'd do it over again. And so in the structures in most places of the world, there weren't very many windows, there weren't very many doors. There was close quarters, structures back then where families lived in. First of all, human beings were smaller than we are today. And very often an entire family lived in a room, slept in a room, worked in a room, ate in a room, got together in a room, didn't get together in a room, worked everything out. And there were again, like I said, there were very few windows. And I imagine the winter time. I remember one time I was going to be doing a winter solstice celebration, and we were talking about the importance of, why some of our ancestors brought evergreens into the house during that time of year, because it's just like, please give me something that looks like life, because in the middle of winter in this dwelling and dealing with the animals and dealing with everything else, I don't know if I can feel life right now. And so in the 11th and 12th centuries, what was really interesting in terms of religion was all of a sudden there was this idea that people got into of what was called sacred mathematics. And sacred mathematics, and I'm speaking very generally around different places of the world, so I'm speaking in very general terms here, very generic terms. But sacred mathematics meant that when cathedrals were built, places of worship, now they had stained glass windows since the 7th century, but they really didn't know what to do with them. There was a wisdom in the stained glass windows. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So this technology came along, and it was a really cool technology, and they used it, but they didn't really realize the wisdom of it. So they began to create these cathedrals, and suddenly within that time, there was this idea among a lot of religions in the world to open up and to create a large expanse, a huge, large expanse. Sometimes went up for a couple of stories in a room, and where the ground floor was pretty much empty. And where in a lot of religions, practice, if you went to the cathedral or you went to the temple, you stood. You know, today we always think about sitting, but in a lot of traditions you stood. And if there were choirs, if there were singing, if there was some guy who had some sort of a sermon or a message at some time, so you had this wide open floor space that went up, these walls, and it expanded almost. It felt like walking into a place, even though it was enclosed, it was almost like it was to the sky. And then these windows, these magnificent windows, were placed up high, and there was statuary and there were icons. And when you came in, your eyes were drawn up. You know, I've never been to the Sistine Chapel, for example, but people have told me that when you go in, you just automatically are drawn up. And that's not an accident. It's in the engineering of the building. It's what's called the sacred mathematics, the sacred engineering of the building. So I want you to imagine this. You live in the 11th and 12th century, the way I described it, in the darkness. And once a week, or maybe a couple times a week, you walked into town, or you rode something into town, or you drove your cart into town with your horses, and you got off, and you went into a place, and you were drawn to this openness, this space, this magnificence. And even if there wasn't a lot of light in the sky, whatever light was there, it was picked up on. Now this is the wisdom of the stained glass windows. The mathematics, the engineering of the stained glass windows was to pick up the light and when the light passed through the stained glass windows, to come forward with the hues of different colors. Imagine people who lived in the hues of browns and grays, in darkness. And they come into a place where all these hues of color raining down upon them. Now, what's significant about this is that it's the 11th and 12th centuries that in various religions, God, the concept of God, became the concept of light and space. Light and space. The idea of transformation. You know, I get it why down through the centuries there's these ideas, you know, heaven is a place of gold and lightness and angels and choirs and the saints are walking around down there and, you know, and they got these great buffets and all this kind of stuff. You're just kind of hanging out. I get that idea, you know, as an archetype because we're looking for transition. We're looking for something larger. And so I imagine the people of the 11th and 12th centuries, they have this difficult job they're doing to live and survive. And they had to bury a horse that week and they found out that some rodents got into the crops and, you know, whatever. And they come in there and they've got all kinds of issues in their life and they're looking for inspiration. And when we look at religion in the 11th and 12th centuries is when the idea of inspiration comes in. God is light, God is love, God to inspire, a place of inspiration. Joseph Campbell talked about going, you know, he probably went to every great cathedral in the world in his lifetime and how awe-inspiring and how emotional he felt. It didn't matter the religion to him. It's just how emotional he felt when he came in. He said they were places of inspiration. They were places of hope. And so the wisdom, and I want to think of these cathedrals as occupying wisdom. I know that sounds odd because we think of wisdom as, you know, some great writer or orator or teacher or, you know, something like that, someone who leaves behind the written word or the spoken word or the theologian, you know, let's bring forward, you know, how should I live? What's the meaning of life? We think about that. And the architecture in these cathedrals themselves, these physical structures, actually occupied the space of wisdom. I want to go back to the prayer I opened today's service with. What is it? God is. God is. And people began to identify, I think that's why people identified, you know, it's kind of old school when we say, you know, the house of the Lord, the house of God. Now, as metaphysicians, we know that God is all there is. And actually, we would argue that these cathedrals were simply copying the sense we have when we're in a grove of redwoods, when we're standing on the beach, when we're standing on a a ledge overlooking a gorgeous desert or a gorgeous forest, or we go onto a river. I as a young kid, I grew up in the Feather River Canyon, and to me, I would, as a little tiny kid, because we lived right next to the river, I would walk out in my backyard and in the expanse of that canyon and that river, and it was huge. And so we know that that's where God is. But the deal is that in that time, I get why people began to call it, the house of God, because I can feel that. And the psychology of this is that when we move into the light and we move into open space, we begin to move into possibility. As someone who has done counseling, in my lifetime, not only have I been in counseling, but I facilitated a lot of counseling in my lifetime. I know that people I work with, and I know this is true of myself. You walk into the office and meet the counselor. Okay, Andy, what's going on? Well, so I start to talk about what's going on, and what's going on is kind of small, and it's boxed in, and it's like in a little box, and I'm opening this box, and I say, look, it's a financial issue, it's a relationship issue, it's a, what is the meaning of life issue, it's a I'm getting older issue, and there's limitation. And so the job of counseling, in my opinion, what I would call transformational spirituality or transformational psychology is, let's dump the box out onto a larger surface and spread it out. And let's look for possibility and potential. Space, light. Let's take a step back from it. In the 11th and 12th centuries, people were living life and there was no space. It was right here. They walked into a cathedral. Suddenly it was like this. God is. God is possibility. God is potential. God is light even in this darkness. Isn't that an amazing thing? This is one of the oldest concepts in spirituality, because when we look to the East specifically, and those of you who have been students of the East, you know that one of the lessons, 101, Eastern tradition 101, you get together with a lama or a master or a teacher or something, and you want to talk about life, you want to talk about healing. What's the one thing they do? They've been doing this for hundreds of years. They take a glass of water, okay, and they take a little bit of dirt and they sprinkle it in there and they stir it up, and they create some swirling mud. It's stirred up, and they set it down. Now the person with the problem, they say, just sit here, just wait. You sit and you sit and you sit and you sit. And the mud that's been created begins to settle, begins to settle, begins to settle. You say, so your life that was all muddy is now settled. It's now clear. Why? Well, because you let it settle. Because you made me go into a different frame of mind. I was not living in the glass. I was outside of it, watching it. And I began to see the possibility and the potential. Because the thing about clear water is, what is it? It picks up the light. You can see through it. The thing about some of those cathedrals, those ancient cathedrals, you go inside and you know you're inside, but somehow you don't feel like you're inside. Because of the expanse, because of the light. What this is all about is the idea that the brilliance of spirit shows itself in space. I don't mean outer space. It might be in the outer space, but I mean space. To allow ourselves to move outside that little bungalow of problems that we live in when it's right in our face. And to see that there's something larger. Earlier today, just a little bit ago, and I've already referred to this when I started the service, my prayer today was, God is. God is. In New Thought, religious science, we teach, Centers for Spiritual Living, we teach the 5 stages of prayer. And the first stage is, God is all there is. For my money and in my life, the people I've worked with, I swear, I think that is the most powerful part of the whole prayer, you know? And maybe the prayer is about making my car payment or finding a new job, or I'm lonely and I want to find a partner, or I need to move, or I want to move, or, you know, or I've lost my way, or my kids aren't speaking to me, or whatever. We got, you know, we have some agenda in the prayer. And so we're going to get there, you know, we're going to make our way there. The 5 steps get us there. But for my money, the thing that I learned in this teaching a long time ago was step 1 is so powerful. God is. Because it takes us out of that dark place. It brings us into the sacred mathematics and the sacred geometry of potentiality and possibility. In the 11th and 12th century, people were walking home feeling better about the farm. Well, what did that guy say today that made you feel better about the farm? I really don't know what the guy said. To be honest with you, I was just looking up at those stained glass windows. And I was just looking. And when that Gregorian choir sang, I probably got my times mixed up. I apologize. When that choir sang, it echoed in there, and the acoustics, and here was the light, and you know, I feel better. You have any answers to anything? Not really, but I feel better. I mean, that's amazing. Because what we know is that when we feel better, then that's when the better ideas begin to become possible. Potentiality and possibility. Good counseling, good spiritual practice opens us up to possibility and to potential. It gets us out of our box. It creates a space where God is. I've been watching a reality TV show called Family Karma. It's about East Indians who have come into the Miami area. And there's a really big East Indian culture in the Miami, in the southern part of Florida. And so this reality show is in one of these communities where these families have known each other forever. And the parents are generally, they came from India. A lot of them had arranged marriages. Almost all of them had arranged marriages. They come here, now they're raising their kids. And now the kids in this show are like late 20s, early 30s. They've gone to college, they've got their professions, and now they're starting to move into relationships and everything. And because the families are really tight-knit, there's a lot of rules in it and everything. And so anyway, so you get to know these people, you get to know their families like reality shows do, and you get into the drama and the trauma, and you get into the good and the bad and the ugly, and you can cry and you can laugh. And and whoever does this show, I mean, I don't really watch much reality TV, but I really have enjoyed this one. And so there's one woman in it, a young woman in her late 20s or early 30s, and she wants to get married. And her parents had an arranged marriage, but see, her parents came from, they went through an arranged marriage, came to the United States. They had her, and then they split up, they divorced. And so the family in India is like, oh my God, what are you doing? You don't divorce. Well, see, that was the next stage in evolution. That was what happened. And so they went through a divorce. And so this young girl is growing up in a community where there's hardly any divorces. She's an only child. Most families definitely had more than one child. And so, and her parents were bitterly divorced. They didn't get along at all. I mean, they shared time with her, and they would talk about when it was their time to take her on the weekend or take her to school or take her to dance class, they would show up in front and they would sit in the car and she would come out and she would get in and they'd drive away, and they never saw each other. They didn't, the husband and wife didn't like each other, and they never remarried. That's what's really interesting. They never remarried after that. And so this woman has grown up with every holiday, every special occasion, there were two. Never came together. And she would go to her friends' houses where, the marriages tended to stay together and there were families. And so she saw that way of loving and living and the raucousness and everything about the family and the good and the bad and the ugly. And she craved that. And so the thing is about this show at this particular time is she's very interested in a man that she may be wanting to marry, and they haven't gotten, I mean, the arranged marriages are over now. And so these parents kind of don't know how to show up at their young adult kids, because they've got to go out and date and do all that stuff. So this is the evolution. So anyway, this woman is with a guy that she thinks she would like to marry, and they're becoming serious. And so she arranges a dinner where her mom and dad will be present. And everybody's like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. Although mom and dad love her and they want to be there for her. But it shows them, like these reality shows do, it shows mom and dad in their own corners, angst over it. Gee, do I want to go? I don't want to go. This could go sideways. Don't expect anything great. There's all this like bad blood and stuff. But anyway, they come together in this dinner, and this is so beautiful. So they're showing it, and nobody's really talking. And they know the guy that she's with because he grew up in this community as well. So they know him since he's a little kid. He knows both these people, and so they all know each other. But there's just crickets, And so finally, this young woman says, "Okay." She kind of excluded her boyfriend for a moment. She goes, "The three of us. I want the three of us to. Each of us is going to share something that we remember fondly when we were a family before your divorce. It could be funny, it could be great, it could be whatever." So they went around and they shared. And oh my God, all three of these people would laugh and smile. I remember that. Oh my God, is that what happened? And suddenly you began to see this melt away. And what was melting away was the awkwardness, the darkness, the shadow. So then they have the dinner, they've lightened up. The ex-couple is actually sitting next to each other on their side of the table, and a little bit of conversation starting between them. And so the young woman says, at one point in the issue, we're thinking, we may be heading in the direction of marriage. What advice would you give us? And the older man and woman say, don't give up on love. During your marriage, work harder at love than we did. Work harder at love. And they both agreed to that statement. And, I sat there and I thought about the cathedrals. I thought, this is the light coming in. This is the space. These two people broke up, say 15, 16 years ago. All that space, all that time, whatever work they've been doing. And at the centerpiece is their daughter. And what does she represent? She represents possibility and potential. She represents going forward. She represents evolution. And they both, the thing they have in common is they love her so much. They're in the cathedral, they're in the lights, they're in the space. And within the space, within that space of just letting love be there. What are some of the names of God in religious science? God is love. Just let God be there. Okay. And this little dinner at this restaurant became so powerful. And then, so dinner was over, and they were all hugging each other. And so they're all going to leave together. And the two older people tell the younger couple, "You guys go. We wanted to talk to each other really quickly." And the daughter's going, "Uh-oh." No, it's all good, right? And they look at each other and they say, let's be there for her. Separately, but let's be there for her. And then they started talking about how great it's going to be to have grandchildren. And they were both beaming. They were both happy. And it was such an incredible moment. This idea of space, this idea of illumination, how important it is. What happened at that dinner? God is. You can't get them together. Oh my God, their divorce was so terrible, and and what are you doing? No, God is. See, she was banking on love. She was banking on openness. She was banking on light. God is. You know, I've been a minister now for about 15 or 16 years. And one of the things that was interesting, there was so much interesting about when I got into ministry, but one of the things that was interesting was when you're in a center community, you know, and you get to know each other and you know each other intimately and you get involved. And then one day somebody makes their transition. And they say, "Oh, Andy, by the way, oh, you get a phone call. Oh my God, they passed away. You know, made their transition. And you know, in 4 or 5 days, we want you to do the service." And see, the thing is, what's interesting about that is because our way, we don't. You know, maybe other ministers here at the center would disagree with me about this. We don't do memorials. We do celebration of life. And so when you're this type of minister and you get that phone call, and you may know them very well, but you're doing a celebration of life. And maybe they were very dear to you. Maybe you got to know them. Maybe they came to your office a few times and shared about themselves, and you started to care and love and become involved in their life. And then one day you get the phone call, you know, and then it's like, you know, because there's that part of us, you know, that wants to go, you know, lost, gone. It's part of our socialization, especially in America. You know, it's memorials. It's like, you know, we've got this overlay of heaven and hell and all this stuff. You know, all these mythologies around it and all this kind of stuff. And so that wants to kick in, but it's like, no, it's a celebration of life. It's a celebration of life. You know. And I've had that recently. A woman named Julie Cook just made her transition, and nobody expected it at all. And I had only seen her about 4 days before, and I hadn't seen her in a long time because of the COVID thing. We would text and we would talk on the phone. And the thing about Julie and I is we worked for 8 years together in the Center for Spiritual Living Paradise, where she was our center manager. She was the bookkeeper. She was the face. She had the job Crystal has at this center. She answered the phone and she was the face that greeted you, and she ran things and she attended meetings, and we worked so closely together. You know, I was a minister. She was the director of things, and, you know, worked through everything together, and we became very, very close. And Judy and I became close with she and her husband, and also her mother Joan. We got very close to her. And I get a phone call one day recently. It's like, Julie left. You know, by the way, you're going to do her celebration of life. So, God is. My job to be the friend of hers that I was and am, and to honor my friend who still is to come forward and celebrate her life because God is. I have to open up to the cathedral of light and space and allow God to come in. That's the brilliance of the sacred mathematics they talked about, the creation of space where God could filter in. And we know God is everywhere, all present. We know that. I'm just simply saying, as human beings on this earth, you know, with the energies we work with and all that stuff, the idea that we can experience that is very powerful. So I get the phone call, I'm in shock. There's some texting, there's some Facebook stuff going on. People are talking, tears are shed and all that stuff. But then I turn to, I have to walk into the cathedral of God is. I know one thing, God is. And even, see, to be able to go somewhere and have coffee with Julie and see her and laugh with her and see her smile and see her glistening eyes, all that stuff, that's one thing. Now, she is just as much alive as she ever was because God is. You get the phone call. Julie's made her transition. I know one thing, God is. I know one thing, God is. This is probably the most powerful thing, I believe, in our teaching. Ernest Holmes said, we must clarify our own vision, becoming as light, lighting the way forward through a learned lesson or perspective. We must become a cathedral. We must become the light for the way forward. And he went on to say, the spiritual path leads to illumination, to intuitive perception, to a knowing. What is it we know? I know one thing, God is. That's it. What's going on in the family, my job, the politics, somebody leaving this world, all that stuff. I know one thing, God is. I got to get in that cathedral. I got to get in that, because that cathedral, the wisdom about that cathedral was within that cathedral was a representation of the truth. God is. If that is the only prayer we ever say, I believe it is much more than enough. God is. God is. And I'm looking forward to celebrating her life. I want to thank you for being here today. And so now